big thank you to Victoria for producing this video for us, and we'll make sure that it's not only available on our website, but we will tweet about it in a few minutes. You'll be able to access it on our Twitter and Facebook accounts. So without further ado, we're going to start with the next panels. It's a roundtable, the meaningful participation of Canadian women in the Alliance, with the moderator Julie Lindhout, and our speakers, Dr. Grace Scoppio, Lieutenant Colonel Rhea McLean, and Commodore Rebecca Patterson. So please come to the field. On commence avec Rhea ou...
Je sais pas comment ça va se passer. So maybe I should stay on standby.
Yeah, and also with
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this clear to everyone? Okay, good. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon on several counts. I was born in a German-occupied country during the Second World War, which was liberated by Allied efforts. And so I grew up on the whole notion, that whole belief in the benefit of Allied effort and how we need to sustain all of that. And also from the point of view of my education background, I'm very pleased to be involved with an organization that was charged with educating people about NATO and the role of NATO and the role of Canadians in NATO. And so that has been a very important part of my life as well for more than 25 years. And now I'm very pleased to be actively involved with WIIS-Canada, because it has always been of interest to me to help women sort of move through various activities. I know that 25 years ago, when I first started going to Atlantic Treaty Association events in Brussels and around there, I might have been the lone woman, or one of two or three in a room full of 100. But I was used to that because it was the same story at the higher levels of education at that time. So I think altogether we have come a very long way to not only support people who are so essential to the peace process, and that is the women of the world, and to prove to them, to the rest of the world, that the efforts of women are essential. Because after, more than providing 50% of the population, what some people often state, but I do also know from all the educational research that mothers are way more influential in how their children grow up and what their interests in culture and so on are like, than even then the most interested fathers. So from that perspective too, I think this is very, very important. And so I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon and to introduce to you three women who have been actively engaged in the whole international defense and security process. They come from very different backgrounds and will present some of their own experiences, and will be willing to answer some of your questions, and I think will give you a very rounded perspective of the role of women in the whole process right now. So our format will be that each of the speakers will speak for about 10 minutes about their own background and experiences, and then we will have questions and answer sessions. I might ask a couple of questions to get us going, but then we'll throw it open to the floor. So our first speaker, I think, will be Dr. Grace Scoppio from the Royal Military College of Canada. I'm not going to go into detailed bios because you have those in your program, and it's much more interesting to listen to what they have to say. Dr. Scoppio has done extensive research, and so that is one of the areas that she will be able to tell us a little bit more about. So you have the word, Dr. Scoppio.
Yes. Bon après-midi à tous et à toutes. Je donnerai mes mots d'ouverture en anglais. Cependant, si vous avez des questions en français, vous êtes les bienvenus à les poser en français. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here, and I would like to thank the other organizers for this wonderful opportunity. And I know I asked a lot of questions when I was invited, but that's just me asking questions. I apologize. I was thrilled when in late January I received the invitation by Carolyn to be part of this panel and to share my personal experience on the meaningful participation of women in the Alliance. In the letter, it was mentioned that I was invited due to my critical role in the military education system, my research on gender in military institutions, and my participation in the selection committee of the Halifax Peace with Women Fellowship. And so just to get us started, I will spend my 10 minutes just saying a few words about each of these three areas. In terms of my role in the military education system, this journey began in 2002 as section head of the Canadian Defence Academy in Kingston, Ontario, transitioning in 2013 as Associate Dean of Continuing Studies at the Royal Military College of Canada, where I'm currently the Dean as of 2017, one of the key academic leadership positions at RMC, along with my other peers, deans. Concurrently, I'm a professor at the RMC Department of Defense Studies, teaching graduate level courses and supervising master students, both face-to-face and via distance learning. I'm also very involved serving the broader education academic community and serving on in various functions, in particular with the Comparative and International Education Society of Canada. In 2002, upon completion of my PhD in education at OAC right here at the University of Toronto, I had an interview at the Canadian Defence Academy headquarters, and I was the first academic that was hired in this newly created headquarters. I spent the next 11 years as a senior staff officer, validations, senior staff officer, lesson learned, etc., leading wonderful different teams of integrated teams of military and civilians. And we conducted various research projects looking at military education, professional development, organizational learning, and lesson learned, just to name a few. Our research took us across various Canadian Armed Forces bases and wings, from coast to coast. Our several research reports include one that I'm particularly fond of, called Learning Together, Lessons on Canadian Forces Skill Sets for Multinational Interagency Operations. I was very fortunate also to sit on various Canadian Armed Forces, National Defense working groups, and committees, and participate in various professional development opportunities, such as the NATO Lesson Learned Staff Officer course in Sweden. While at CDA, I also taught with the RMC Department of Political Science. In 2013, I was the Associate Dean, as I said, for 3 years. And 2017, upon retirement of the former Dean, and I was on sabbatical actually, I was encouraged to apply for the position. And to be honest with you, had I not been encouraged, I probably would not have applied. And I've heard this of other women in leadership position, and I'm not sure what it is, but sometimes we need to be encouraged to apply, even though we probably know at the back of our mind that we are qualified for the job, but we hesitate. I was appointed Dean by the principal of RMC. I interrupted my sabbatical to take the position, and I am currently the only female dean at RMC. Indeed, I'm the first female dean of continuing studies and the third ever female dean at RMC overall. Being the only female dean at the table right now in a male-dominated organization is not easy, but I'm following the footsteps of two great female leaders before me, Dr. Jane Harrington, who was Dean of Arts for, I believe, 2 or 3 years, and Dr. Laura Robinson, who was Interim Dean of Arts for 1 year. The second point that was mentioned in the letter was my research on gender in military institutions. My research is often related to defense. However, it does not fall within a single discipline. Rather, it crosses disciplinary boundaries, both in terms of the wide range of topics that I investigate and in terms of the interdisciplinary background of my research teams. In my opinion, interdisciplinary teams bring diverse backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, and worldviews, thus allowing for greater creativity and at the same time preventing the pitfalls of groupthink. My research is often comparative or international. This stems from my doctoral training. And so to me, it's always important to compare what different countries, communities, and organizations do in order to identify best practices and where appropriate, adapt such practices to new context. As such, my research and related conference engagements have taken me to various places across the world. My research in diversity in military organizations started with a comparative study looking at diversity strategies in military and police forces in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. I was very lucky to be able to travel to various military bases and defense organizations in these countries to gather my data. And in follow-up studies, again, I was very lucky to travel to New Zealand to observe firsthand how they have been so successful in integrating Maori culture and Maori language in their military organization. More recently, I've been working with an interdisciplinary team investigating gender issues in Canadian military colleges. And I'll be happy to share some of that research with you in the following conversation after we introduce ourselves. Thirdly, my participation in the Halifax Peace with Women Fellowship Selection Committee. In 2018, again, I was very lucky to be invited to participate as selector in the first ever committee for the inaugural Halifax Peace with Women Fellowship, a new program that aims to advance women's leadership in international security, supported by the Halifax International Security Forum. Through this program, the committee selected 10 exceptional senior female active duty officers from allied countries. These women participated in a 3-week study tour visiting the political capitals and technological hubs of the United States and Canada, and concluded the program by participating at the annual Halifax International Security Forum. Participating in that selection committee and in the forum itself was a great honor for me and an important contribution towards this fantastic new program to support female military leaders across allied countries. I would like to conclude by saying that I believe that to be an effective female leader in the defense environment, it is important to have a strong understanding not only of military culture, but also of the cultures of other organizations that work in collaboration with defense. It is also important to have the ability to work in a male-dominated environment and understand gender dynamics, as well as to interact with diverse people. It is a combination of hard and soft skills, including resilience, empathy, interpersonal skills, cross-cultural skills, and strong communication skills. I truly believe in the power of teamwork and collaboration between military members and civilian members of the team, as each individual member brings the diverse ideas, perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences to the team. And consequently, the end product will always be stronger and more insightful. Finally, as a leader within a Canadian defense environment, it is very important, in my opinion, to support multiculturalism, bilingualism, and Indigenous culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've given us a lot of food for thought to get us started. I would now like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Rhea McLean, and her background is, as you can tell from her uniform, Air Force. So again, we have a different perspective, and Colonel McLean is currently involved with the operation in Latvia, and so that also brings a very important perspective to our whole discussion today.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm originally from Cape Breton, so I have a very bad tendency of talking very, very quickly. So if I do and you can't follow, please just throw something at me. But today is a bit of a treat because everybody here is English or French first language, which is new. So as you can see, I have a couple PowerPoint slides because I've been in the NATO headquarters for a while now, and so we always travel with our PowerPoint. So just a real quick background on me. I got interested in gender while I was doing my Joint Command and Staff program in Toronto. So that was 2016, 2017. And I had the honor of working with Dr. Alan Okros, who's here in the audience today. And so I specifically did my focus research on gender integration in the Canadian Armed Forces specifically. And then that kind of took me down a different path, which brought me to Latvia and now currently into my current position, which is in Brunsum in the Netherlands. Slide, please. Okay, so when I was in Latvia, so as you can see from the background, so what was Canada doing in Latvia? So basically, Enhanced Forward Presence is NATO's involvement to the deterrence mission against Russia in the Baltics. Specifically, Canada is the framework nation for Latvia. So Latvia, as one of our allies, they're the host nation. Canada takes the lead with our 7, I believe at the time, other partners that were in Latvia working towards the deterrence and defense mission. Interestingly, for Canadians, so as far as a full-time gender advisor goes in the Baltics, I was it. So Canada was the only country that fully supported the gender advisor piece. And as just an interesting side note for folks who aren't aware, with respect to gender training, employing of gender advisors, gender focal points, in NATO regs, that is specifically a national responsibility. So if a country does not want to train or provide the personnel to do those roles, a country is not required to do so. So the great thing for me is that it really gave me the opportunity to shape what I did in Latvia. And it was also really interesting because Canada in this field is seen as a bit of a leader. So I had quite a few opportunities to meet with other nations as well as some very interesting people. Slide, please. So the biggest thing that I had to do was really shape participation. So what does it mean to be a gender advisor? So for me, I was the second ever deployed gender advisor for the Canadian Armed Forces. I replaced the first ever gender advisor, who was Major Mike Duteau out of a reserve unit here in Toronto. He was there for the first 6 months. I replaced him in January of 2018. And it was really interesting. So when I got there, because nobody was really aware of what a gender advisor was, what we were supposed to do, there's really two sides. There's the internal role, where you look at your own forces and what we as Canadians are doing and what we as the Alliance are doing internally. And there's also the external look. What are our adversaries doing? What is happening within the local population? Those types of issues. So when I got to Latvia, I was given very clear guidance that my focus was on an internal look. A lot of that had to do with some cultural and political sensitivities, working with our allies in the area as well as just the local civilian population. So what I really did, and for the Canadians that are in the military, we really understand, we focused on GBA+, which is our Gender-Based Analysis Plus training, which is common across the federal government, as well as Operation Honor, which I believe Commodore Patterson will provide a great deal of info on. So I really focused on, so for Canadians, those two programs, they're non-negotiable for us. So we're told we're going to receive training in them, so our personnel receive training in them. So it really gave me, when dealing with the Canadians, that sort of chain of command legitimacy to be able to promote different gender initiatives based on sort of that as my bedrock and foundation. The key that I found though, and it's really kind of tough in the gender sphere, if you will, is it's finding and showing the value. Because all of the commanders, all of the local leaders that you will work with, they all want to see what is, like, getting down to brass tacks, what have you actually provided, what concrete value. People don't want to hear the theoretical. Theoretically, this is why it is really great. Everyone has read the research, everyone is aware of the resolutions, but why? What specifically has this done? Slide, please. So for me, based on that, I really focused on the training and education piece. And with respect to NATO, there's kind of that understanding that the need for looking at a gender perspective in a pre-crisis, pre-conflict situation. So when you speak to most of the allies, if you're looking at an Afghanistan situation or an African-style conflict, folks automatically understand the importance of really considering gender and various demographics because they can see the gross human rights violations, specifically how women tend to be more disproportionately disadvantaged in these situations. When you come to a sort of pre-Article 5 with peers, near peers, and allies, there's really a big gray area. What do we actually do? So the first thing that we did is we built a robust network of gender focal points throughout the Canadian-led battle group. So for us, that was 16 gender focal points. That was in all of the contributing nations provided personnel, all of the various units provided personnel, which was a huge win for us. We also looked on the internal for Canadian, specifically medical training when it comes to sexual assault. So surprisingly, we did some work with our Canadian medical officer who was deployed, and he realized that he was the only person on our camp that was qualified or authorized to do any sort of sexual assault response. So again, understanding that statistically speaking, the victim of a sexual assault is likely to be a female, and statistically speaking, she would likely prefer to speak to a female healthcare practitioner. We took steps to make sure that we also deployed females with appropriate training so that there are both females, males with the qualified training depending on victim preferences. So we also were able to bring inclusion of gender perspectives to civic exercise that we did. So that's our civil military cooperation. So work closely with our allies, with the U.S. and also the Latvian host nation, and really we did a training exercise where basically they looked at a need to evacuate a town that was a Latvian town closer to the Russian border. So we really applied a lot of gender-specific and age-specific requirements to how are they going to evacuate people, how were they going to respond. We applied the language issue because for those who don't know, about 25% of the Latvian population is ethnically speaking Russian. So again, just throwing in all of those different dynamics to really have the folks consider all of the human dimensions. And then we specifically adapted our outreach programs to be more inclusive of male and female. One simple example we had is we had a bunch of former NHLers and hockey coaches come out to do a hockey interaction with the Latvians, because hockey is huge in Latvia. And it was interesting, it wasn't until it got brought up at the meeting, I was like, hey guys, we actually have a really solid Canadian national team. Has anyone maybe reached out to some of our all-star females to see if they would be interested in participating? And again, it was sort of that light bulb moment of, oh, no, we didn't. So again, it was just trying to adapt what we did so that, again, I once had a great mentor tell me, you can't see what you can't be. So if you really want to engage the little Latvian girls, you should probably also have some female professional hockey players. So we did that as well. Slide, please. So for the external piece, I had some really great opportunities. I think my personal highlight for my tour in Latvia, so the lady up on the screen there is former President Rhea, and I apologize, I cannot say her name. For those that don't know, she was elected president of Latvia back-to-back terms in the 90s, early 2000s. Her and her family escaped World War II in the 40s and immigrated to Canada. She met her husband, did a PhD, I believe, at the University of McGill, went back to Latvia, huge surge of nationalism, and was elected twice, which is incredible. So I got to do sort of a key leader engagement with her to discuss kind of what are the gender-specific issues in the Baltics, particular to Latvia. And it was really quite illuminating. So if you just look at the raw stats in Latvia, as an example, their females tend to hold much higher representation as far as CEOs, medical professionals, dental, all of the sort of professions that typically more male-dominated. And she provided a lot of info as to why that was. So specifically, unaware till I spoke with her, is the reason they have so many more female CEOs, female doctors, female specialists is because all of the males get headhunted and they get higher wages to leave the country and they will go work elsewhere in the EU, whereas the females feel obligated to stay home and keep the family ties strong. So it was very fascinating, and it was also fascinating to learn that Latvia has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the EU. And it's kind of one of those things that it's almost like a don't ask, don't tell. They don't like speaking about it. They keep it very separate from their life, but it really gave that better perspective of, okay, what are differences here that maybe we can use in our planning, what makes sense and what doesn't. Slide, please. So I also got to engage with some more of our allies. So on Canada Day, I got to go to the Canadian, the Embassy of Canada to the Czech Republic in Prague, where they promoted a gender equality event. So really fascinating there is I got to work with the Czech Minister of Defense, and she is the then minister. She's the lady in blue with the red tank top. And she was very fascinating to speak to because she was very interested in how Canada was able to get our current representation to roughly just under 16% across the armed forces. What do we do that makes it more appealing? What sort of ideas, strategies? So that was pretty fascinating. Slide, please. Following that, I also got to go to the Canadian Embassy in Poland. Now in this one, specifically, the officers in the middle were looking for specific advice, guidance on what does Canada do to retain our females? What do we do as far as physical test standards, medical standards? How do we deal with things like parental leave, maternity leave, uniforms? So it was really fascinating to be seen in that light as a leader with our allies who were just honestly looking for what have you done, what works, what doesn't work, and why. And that was a really great space to learn for me as a professional in the armed forces how to make a difference not only for our troops on the ground, but also to help our allies succeed in an area that I personally feel is incredibly important. Last slide, please. And then finally, the biggest thing that I took from Latvia, first and foremost, is the promotion of women in the armed forces. For a lot of us that are in uniform in the armed forces take it for granted. I know I really didn't think about it in the way I did until I went to staff college 2016, 2017, and really promoting the great work that our women do. Every female that I've had the opportunity to work with in uniform overseas has been a certifiable, hardcore, just incredibly professional, intelligent human being. And a lot of that doesn't necessarily get recognized, and it doesn't get promoted, I feel, to the way it should. Acknowledging gender-based differences. So one of the big things I learned from Dr. Okros, and that I really saw especially overseas, is Canada specifically, we tend to take more of a gender-neutral approach. And I've worked with commanders, and there are times where they honestly do, they treat the men and women 100% the same way, and we really shouldn't be. There are critical differences that we should address and we should focus on. And there are times they think they treat us the same way, and they're really not, and we should be. And it's really understanding where those moments are and what those differences are that I think is important. Implementation of gender perspectives, sort of in that pre-conflict, pre-crisis, that's an incredibly difficult one for NATO right now. We are really trying to figure out how we do that. What do we do in that peacetime scenario? Because again, it's all nation-specific, voluntary. And then also, like I said, just the sort of perils of gender neutrality. There are quite a few individuals, be it male or female, that honestly believe that what we're doing as is working and it's great, that think we treat everyone the same way. Not necessarily the case, and it's incredibly important on both sides to realize, respect those differences so that we can improve as a group and really provide the best defense and protection of our values and our nations as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I told you we would get very different perspectives that would cross a very rich area and have a lot to think about. And the final speaker on our panel is Commodore Rebecca Patterson, who has both a Navy and a medical background. So again, another aspect to that, and also extensive experiences in Afghanistan. So I'll give the word to Commodore Patterson.
You never want to be the third person because you've shifted your notes in your head 1,000 times. And I just actually want to throw these away. So I figure what I can provide for you is I can provide you with a perspective as a woman over a 30-year career. And my current position, as you've probably seen, is Director General, Canadian Armed Forces Strategic Response Team on Sexual Misconduct, and we're not getting t-shirts made too big in both official languages. But my secondary duty, which is almost it could actually be a full-time equivalent, is as the defense champion for women. Now, based on what we've heard here, I would like to make an observation that is, I think you'll understand. So, the Defense Champions Program in the Canadian Armed Forces came out under employment equity, and it looked at the designated groups, and we applied champions and women and visible minorities and Aboriginals and disabilities. But women are not all the same. It's really shocking. So we're 50% of the population, and then you go into defense and security, and we're making the assumption that in the public service, women are about 50% right now. You've heard what we are in the Canadian Armed Forces, but that we all have the same issues, and that one champion could do one thing. And I know from having been part of this organization from the beginning, my needs as a military woman were not the same as my civilian counterparts, and vice versa. So I'm actually very happy to have Lieutenant Commander Amber Camiso here as well, because she's our National Military Co-Chair. I just going to put a plug in. All women are not the same, okay? All right, moving on. So where do I come from? So I kind of come from an interesting background because I joined prior to the end of the Cold War. Yeah, I did. And I joined in a very, very, very traditional woman's occupation. I joined as a trained critical care nurse. And I came from a military family. My dad was a submariner, my mom was a Royal Navy nurse, and I grew up in Sea Cadets. So I wanted to be a ship driver. So they said, you can be a nurse. All right, okay, whatever. And now we don't train them. So I went off, joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1989, right as the Cold War was ending. And because I was a direct entry nursing officer, I actually went to basic training with everybody else. But I was one of 4 nurses, and it's the first time that actually had nurses turn up in basic training since, well, they just didn't remember when. So it was my first experience, but I was all for it, and it went well. I spent the next few years seeing the end of the Cold War, and yeah, it did make a difference because it changed everything for women in particular. So as a nurse, the couple of years in, what was our first deployment after Cold War? It was Gulf War I. It was the Persian Gulf conflict. And who were the only land-based troops? Yes, one Canadian field hospital. So there we were, 42 women, I believe, were a part of the field hospital in all different occupations. And we headed off to the first Gulf War, and it was very much on a Cold War footing, and I went in there as the little Cold War nurse doing what I thought I was supposed to do. And when I came back, I believe the Dark Ages, we call the 90s the Dark Age, I got that right, yeah, see, I learned a lot from Decade of Darkness. I lived that, and it was an opportunity. Always look at bad times as opportunities as well. So within health services, they literally opened the doors and kicked out everybody. They said, we don't need this hospital-based system we have anymore. And well, there was dust bunnies and people with 2.5 years in basically left standing. But what did that mean to me? It meant that all of a sudden I had 2 deployments back to back. I then went to Somalia with the Canadian Airborne Regiment. I was one of 7 women and just over 2,000 men. And yes, some terrible things happened in Somalia, but some very good things happened there as well. As a woman, I was absolutely able to exercise my leadership. I learned myself within the medical context, so I was safe, right? I was safe. And then it also allowed me to basically be in places that as we evolved as a force and went through the dark ages, all of a sudden in healthcare, I was on the forefront. So I apparently demonstrated some leadership. And we had to go through a complete evolution in health services. And they were like, well, gosh, doctors can't lead. Hard to believe. And anyway, I love them. It's a patriarchal organization within health services as well. Within medical services in the world, as we've already mentioned, it's always been very traditional. The men are the doctors, the women are the nurses, for all sorts of historical reasons we're not going to go into. So it was decided that maybe we needed a different approach to leading health services into the future, into the 2000s. But instead of allowing nurses to be able to lead as nurses, we had to create a new occupation. So I was one of the very first groups who was compulsory occupationally transferred because of my leadership abilities to become a health services operations officer, with the intent that I would be given the opportunity to be key staff officer positions and key line positions. So as a small N nurse, because I am still a registered nurse with the College of Nurses of Ontario, I was given the opportunity to basically have a career of kind of firsts, but always as a nurse and from a nursing platform. So I ended up being the first non-physician who was, second non-physician as commandant of the medical school, but definitely the first nurse. I was the very first non-medical officer who was the commanding officer of Stadacona, that institution on the East Coast. I moved